to have invited me to speak to you about acceleration of aligner treatment by photobiomodulation. We'll go on then. I think I'll have to take that. Yeah. So, acceleration of orthodontic tooth movement nowadays seems to be a topic that is quite often discussed. We have different possibility to do so. One is the surgical enhancement of the speed of movements of teeth, and then we have the vibration to accelerate movements, and finally we have this photobiomodulation, or PBM. Okay, we know that we have a so-called optical window between the wavelengths of 600 to 1,200 nanometers in biological tissues that allows for a maximum penetrations of photons. Now, what do these photons do? This is an old research that's been done by Otto Warburg. He even got a Nobel Prize in 1931. He discovered that cytochrome C oxidase, the terminal enzyme in the mitochondrial oxidative respiration chain, is then activated. And he demonstrated so that the mitochondrial CCO was responsive to light stimulation. So it's an old knowledge that we have here. It's nothing very new. Other workers like Oron and his co-workers demonstrated on human cell cultures that if they are irradiated by low laser treatment, they have a twofold increase in ATP production. Now, what does that mean? ATP production is driven by a high proton concentration in the inner mitochondrial membrane. In stressed cells, we have a decreased metabolism, thus lower proton concentration and lower ATP production. Now, PBM increases ATP production, and by stimulating CCO to absorb then photons and pump protons. Now, this is not a slide that I will comment very longly because that would take hours, but it's just to demonstrate that it's a very complicated biological system that drives from osteoclast precursors to osteoclasts and also to osteoblasts. Alpdogan Kantachi and co-workers have done a lot of work on this, and we understand much more of this system today, but still not everything. What we know are positively three mechanisms that lead to more cell activity by PBM. That's one is the mitochondrial chromophores that absorb these photons and then produce a proton pumping and then ATP production. By this, we have then an increased energy available to the cell and also an increased or normalized metabolism. The second mechanism is this reactive oxygen species production and mitochondrial signaling that stimulates and suppresses transcription factors, DNA and RNA synthesis, and by that a plethora of tissue and cellular activity. Third mechanism that we know is this inducible nitric oxide production through absorption of photons by the nitric oxidase synthase, and this leads then to increased micro and regional blood flow and osteoclastic activity. So I think the scientific basis is there and at least partly known how this works when we treat tissues, cells with photobiomodulation. Now there is a lot of research also done on animals. There's more than 50 articles published that demonstrate the increase in velocity of dental movement. Here there's 5 or 6 of it, but you can find in the literature a lot of these articles showing that, at least in rabbits and in rats, tooth movement can be increased by PBM. Now, the guys from Orthopulse thought that this would be a good idea to use that to increase tooth movement not only in rabbits and in rats, but also in human beings. So they came out with these Orthopulse device. They have an array of LEDs on the inner side, on a medical silicone mouthpiece. Attached to it is an electronic part. There is a battery in there, and there is electronic mechanisms in there that can connect to an app that is on a smartphone from the patient. Patients wear these devices 5 minutes a day on each arch, if you treat both arches, so it's 10 minutes that they have to use it. We have tried also to use it more than 5 minutes, but we didn't experience a better action then. So 5 minutes is quite enough for them. Patients think that it's not uncomfortable to wear that. The time is very short, so it's not difficult to integrate that in daily life. They experience a little bit of warmth when they put that in, and they report, all they report is that they have less pressure sensation, less pain in the first days when they change the aligners. Orthopulse now works on all of these that we just discussed. They use the 850 nanometer wave on their device. And as I just mentioned, they have these apps on their smartphones. So we have a connection also to these apps through a cloud. The information on the app goes to a cloud, and we can connect to that cloud and have the same information that the patients have. So we have, on one hand, a distinct doctor app with Orthopulse patients' compliance at a glance. We can see, does the patient wear his device? We have a tracking of the overall patient's treatment consistency and percentage compliance, and also a detailed treatment log to track individual self-treatment sessions. Now we have a lot of publication in animals, but not a lot on human beings, on the activity of tooth movement in human beings. Now there is one publication by Tim Shaughnessy. It came out on the BMC Oral Health. It's an online magazine that is peer-reviewed, and he reports a 54% average decrease in alignment duration versus control patients. These treatments were done with fixed appliances. Then there is another research that's been done. It's been submitted for publication now, but it's not yet published. And there, Dickerson found a 63% reduction in the average duration per aligner during Orthopulse treatment as compared to the conventionally recommended aligner wear duration. And what he found too is no measurable root resorption in 6 months. Now, It was interesting for me to see what happens clinically in these patients that were treated with PBM. I was invited to be part of a group that got 20 devices and used them on their patient. I used them exclusively on my Invisalign patients. And I wanted to see, among other things, is there a difference between the default speed set by Invisalign in specific tooth movements if we use then PBM? So default translation tipping is a default of 0.25 millimeters, rotation 1 degree, extrusion, intrusion 0.2 millimeters. That's what I use in my patients at all. Now, we have to know that the most complex movements are done at the default speed rate. And all other movements in the same arch follow at a lower speed rate. So I looked at the first thing, at tipping and rotation. This is Nicholas. You see it's okay, class 1, a little crowding in the upper and the lower, so not a problem case, really. Here's what happens. It's the alignment of the upper teeth. I had class 2 elastic because he was slightly towards class 2. Then we had these more pronounced crowding in the lower that requested also some IPR. The alignment, no problem with that. So it's an easy case, nothing special. And it had a short treatment time. We have to compare before and after, so we really got to the prescribed end, or the end that ClinCheck showed. Here you have the plan, the agenda. There was 16 aligner, and the treatment time with orthopulse were 15 weeks, so half the time. We had 13 aligners in the upper, 15 aligners in the lower. Normal treatment time would have been 30 weeks without Invisalign, without orthopulse, and the treatment time with orthopulse, 15 weeks. Now, I wanted to look a bit at the speed of translation. We have here this lower central, that will move forward 2 millimeters from the original position to the final position. We have these 2 millimeters, and we have 15 aligners. So without orthopulse, we could have expected a movement of 0.14 millimeters in these 2 weeks. Now with orthopulse, we had doubled naturally the speed to 0.28 millimeters per week. That's slightly more than default, so not really a big difference. Speed of rotation, we had the lower right canine who was rotated and had to be rotated in, and the rotation was 9 degrees. So again, with these 15 aligners in the lower, we would have had a rotation speed without orthopulse of 0.7 degrees rotation in 2 weeks. And with orthopulse in this 2 weeks, we had a 1.5 degree rotation. So we had more than a double-fold rotation speed, even about 40% more than the default. Now there are other movements that we have to look at: intrusion, distalization, extrusion. So we have another patient here where I looked at these issues. Also not a very complicated case, class 1, a bit of overbite, and especially in the lower front. So we needed to intrude the lower front and naturally also align the upper and lower incisors. X-rays, nothing complicated, really. There again, we had IPR. I used class 2 elastic because there was a little bit of class 2 relation on the right side and especially also on the left side. That was the movement. So the right side turned out pretty well, no problem. The left side, more class 2, nearly end-to-end occlusion. That was what the simulation showed us in ClinCheck with the use of class 2 elastics, naturally. Now, the truth, we didn't get the distalization we were aiming for. And the reason is by the length of the mouthpiece. The mouthpiece reaches just to the first molar. So when we distalize the second molar, we don't have this action of PBM. Orthopulse is working at that. They try now to get a longer mouthpiece back to the second molars so that we have an irradiation in that region too. But in this case, as you see, it's not enough. Incomplete distalization due to short mouthpiece was the consequence. The next thing we looked at was the deep bite. We used these bite frames to help us with deep bite, especially to have a disclusion of the buccal occlusion so that we don't have an intrusion by pressing habits of the patient. And then we have this intrusion here. It's a 3 millimeter intrusion. Without orthopulse, we would have had about 0.15 millimeters per week. With orthopulse, naturally we speed it up to the double fold speed in these 2 weeks, and defold would have been about 0.2 millimeters in 2 weeks. So here we have a distinct, better reaction to the orthopulse treatment. Another thing was the position of this lateral. We all know that laterals are difficult to control, especially if we have to extrude them and rotate them perhaps at the same moment. We have this special attachment. This was also presented this morning. But if we look at the result, it's not what we were looking for. So this extrusion part of the lateral, the left lateral, is incomplete. There again. But we know that we have always these problems with the laterals. So it's not due to PBM, it's more due to the technical part of the aligner. But nevertheless, we see that PBM does not interfere with or does not make it better if you have orthopulse, if you have these technical problems with the aligner. So you cannot overcome that problem. In this case, we had 47 aligners in the upper, 30 aligners in the lower. So normally would be 23 months of treatment. The treatment time with orthopulse was 11 months, but we need to have a case refinement. Conclusion, an acceleration of up to 50% from default tooth movement speed was noted in Invisalign treatments with orthopulse. Difficult movement, though. Extrusion and distalization need more attention. We cannot rely on PBM to solve these problems for us. Now, one question remains. How much can we speed up treatment? How much speed can we have in tooth movements? And I think the next speaker, my friend Dr. Kenji Ojima, will present the answer to that. Thank you for your attention.